Hi, this is just going to be a quick video about a vintage NuTone Chime Base. Back in February of 2017, I did a long video, it's almost an hour and 3/4, showing how to rebuild a K model 8-note chime base. And the chime base that's in the video was dated 1947. This is also a K44 Chime Base, so it's from the same model of chime. However, this chime base is much later. This one is more like probably 1956 or 1957, right towards the tail end of when the K model chimes were probably being replaced with the up-and-coming L model chimes, which are kind of considered to be the early 1960s chime. Although a lot of the dates, they would stagger introductions of new models. It's not like all the K model chimes were discontinued at one point and everything became L's. It was more of a gradual transition. And the reason I wanted to do a quick video about this chime base was to point out some of the differences between this one and the one I did in the first video from 1947. So let's just say on an average this is 10 years later in the production life of K model chimes. And while fundamentally it's the same chime, it has the same chassis assembly. This one has a lot of wall paint and stuff on it. That's what all the white is from. It's not uncommon. And since we're not doing a restoration on this, we're doing a functional repair. We're not going to deal with the white paint all over everything. Anyway, some of the differences are between this one and the earliest one, which is the 47 chime, has to do with some of the details. In the first video, I talk a lot about the grommets that insulate all of the parts off the chassis. And here we have the 4 grommets. This is the motor mounting plate and the switch assemblies on the backside, and we still have grommets on each corner that isolate the motor while it's running to help so it doesn't transmit noise through the metal chassis. But one of the things that is gone is down here we have the 4 sets of screws here, 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 and over on this side. These are the screws that hold the solenoid assembly to the bottom of the chassis. And on the earlier chime, each one of these screws had an individual grommet, and then the screw had a standoff spacer and a washer under it. And in this later version, those grommets are gone. The holes are just small enough for the screws to go through, and that's a real different change. I don't know whether it's a change because they found that it was unnecessary to put the grommets there, or maybe it was a cost-saving measure, not just the cost of the grommets, which I would assume wasn't a lot, but also the labor to assemble the chime so you didn't have to put the 8 grommets in down there. The switch assembly here, which this is your 8 and 4 note switch, this is different than in the other one, and just my opinion, this is probably a less expensive switch than the other one was altogether. So there's that. The biggest change I found, on the back there really isn't much that's different. You can see the difference on the back of the switch. It's just a different kind of switch. You have the volume adjustment rheostat here, the motor cover, and the switch assembly behind it, it seems to be the same as near as I can tell. The biggest difference is it has to do with the solenoids. Now, the plunger assemblies and the strikers are the same, and we can go ahead and actually pop one of these out. We'll do this one. And if we pop it out, they still have the leather tips on the ends of the plungers, and these are the styles like in the first videos that the springs are behind the strikers and they extend out as the solenoid energizes, and then the spring pulls it back. The real difference on this, which I was quite surprised to see, it has to do with the solenoid assemblies themselves. So on all NuTone chimes that I have ever worked on that I can ever remember, the bores of the solenoid, the bores are basically the tubes, these. And these go through the center of the coil, and then the striker, which is metal, is inside, and when the coil is energized, it shoots the striker out through the front, and then the spring pulls it back when it de-energizes. On all NuTone chimes I've ever worked on, these solenoid tubes have always been made out of brass, and it was just, you know, that's what they are. You never would give it a second thought. This particular chime was sent in by a customer. His name is Ian, so Hi, Ian, and thanks for letting me fix your chime and do a video about it. When I was servicing this and working on it and repairing it, as I've shown in all the other videos, the natural or the normal part of a repair of a chime and servicing it is we clean the buildup out of the inside of the bores, and if need be, we hone them a little bit with some 3000 grit wet dry sandpaper, and then we clean up the plungers and the springs and so forth to make sure that everything works and slides freely and they don't bind up, because the solenoids, these are not super powerful solenoids, so everything has to work freely. As I was working on this yesterday and I went to clean the bores, it didn't seem to be going as well as it normally did, and I've cleaned, I don't know, thousands of solenoid bores, so you sort of just do it. You don't have to think too much about it. And what I realized as I was working on it is these particular bores, these are not brass. These are made out of some sort of hard paper coated in resin kind of hardboard material. They're not metal at all. They're not some kind of man-made, I don't know what you would call it exactly. It's like a really heavy, hard coated cardboard tube, basically. And as I was cleaning them, when you clean them with the 3000 grit wet dry sandpaper and the lighter fluid, that is the only thing you're supposed to clean them with. When you do that, normally you get a little bit of brass residue on the wet dry sandpaper when you hone them, and what was coming out looked wrong to me, so I investigated it a little bit more and realized these are not brass at all. The other thing about this is, and you know, if this chime is 1957, it's 60 years old. The strikers didn't fit through the tubes as well as I would have expected them to, even after the cleaning of them. And it could be caused by, you know, over the past 60 years, people have probably squirted stuff in here to free them up or make them work better or whatever they were trying to do. And if it was something like oil or, I don't know, WD-40 or who knows what people use, it might have been absorbed by this cardboardy kind of material that the tubes are made out of, and they seem like they had possibly swollen up a little bit, which made the inside smaller, and the strikers didn't want to really glide through them the way I wanted them to. They have to really move freely. As I showed in the other videos, which if you're interested in this, you should really watch. And I'm sorry it's so long, but it is. When you get the bores really clean, when you take the strikers and you line them up, you put just the very end of it in, when you let go, it has to go thunk and fall through on its own without any hesitation at all. Otherwise, it's not sliding through free enough. So what I ended up having to do with these is I used some 150 grit wet dry sandpaper that was on a plastic sheet instead of a paper backing, so it was stronger, and basically I wrapped it around my pencil, which is what I always use to clean the inside of the bores, and I very carefully sanded the inside of the cardboard tube to enlarge it a little bit till I got to the point for each one where the strikers would actually fall through the way I wanted them to. And that's a big change. So I don't know why these would have been made out of this. I'm pretty sure the solenoids, I know they're real NuTone solenoids because I know what they look like. I'm not sure why they would have gone to a material like this. It could have been that it was just a cost-saving measure and they didn't want to buy the brass tubes anymore. Maybe because this model was being phased out, and you know, in manufacturing, if you're going to buy brass tubes to make solenoid assemblies, maybe you have to buy 10,000 at a time to get a good price, and they didn't want to do that, so they went with this instead. I don't think in the late 50s there was a brass tube shortage, so somebody told me, oh, maybe they couldn't get the brass. Well, the end caps are made out of brass, and the motor mounting plate back here is made out of brass, so I don't know, maybe they had a lot of things lying around, they were using them up. But it's a real change, and it's something to be aware of. Whatever this material that the tubes are made out of is, it is rather brittle. You cannot pry, push, or bend it because it will break. This chime had been worked on before, I think, and this tube down here on the end, number 1 tube, it actually had a pretty good the covers have cracks in them. They're like stress cracks from being pushed on the ends of the tubes, but also the tube itself, it had a crack that went sort of in a curved way about halfway across, well, a quarter of the way across the diameter of the tube, which worried me a lot. So I very carefully used some wood glue, because that seemed like a good choice, and got it in there, and then I put a little piece of wire around the tube and twisted it to close it and hold it in place until the glue dried for a couple days. And then just to sort of help reinforce it, I just used some regular like Scotch tape and wrapped it around it twice to reinforce it a little bit when I push the cap back on. It's not really a high stress area. I'm pretty sure it's probably happened when somebody else was horsing around with this. So it's just kind of an interesting look at how things change over time. Servicing the rest of the chime was exactly like in the first video, and I will put a link to the first video in this video's description so you can go look at that if you want to. Anyway, just sort of an interesting look at a later version of a long-made chime by NuTone and how things change over time. That's all for today. I hope you found this a little bit interesting. If you have a K-model chime and it needs to be serviced, you can get a hold of me and I'll talk to you about it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.